Slipknot is the first of the new metal discographies that I'm going to be slotted into my schedule here and there. Because for the most part, for all the popular new metal bands, I already know most of their albums off the top of my head and doesn't require any fresh listening. They're one of the most well-renowned and popular bands out there, but which one of their records is the best? We Are Not Your Kind and the album that comes above it bore me, and let me tell you why. It all comes down to the problem that I think Slipknot have kind of written themselves into a corner. And I'm going to expand on that point a lot more when we get to the next album. But when it comes to We Are Not Your Kind, I just don't think this album adds anything new to the mix. It's just Slipknot being Slipknot. You've heard it all before. Really just sounds like they're going through the motions, just doing the same old sound they've been doing for years. And to add to that, I'm really not the biggest fan of the lyrical content on this one. I saw these guys live when they were still heavily promoting this album, and Corey was getting up on stage and telling people how special they are and about how they're not like the others. I'm sure it's empowering for some people, but for me it really gives off like that your music scares people kind of vibes, and I just find it a bit cringy. To add to that, I think some of the more melodic and softer sections in this album start to really resemble Stone Sour. And as much as I love Stone Sour, if I want to listen to that sound, I'm just going to listen to that band instead. This album just really didn't do it for me. And I have basically the exact same feelings for the end so far, with this album leaning even further into the Stone Sour territory, particularly in like Corey Taylor's melodies. I do, however, prefer a lot of the riffing on this record compared to the last one. Songs like Warranty have a very catchy and addictive groove to it. But like I was saying earlier, I think Slipknot have really written themselves into a corner. Slipknot are a band with very like identifiable gimmicks and identifiable like characteristics to their sound. The drumming, Corey Taylor's vocals, the fucking keg, the mid-pace riffs. When this band tries to innovate and evolve their music, they're normally met with, fans saying, this isn't Slipknot, it sounds nothing like Slipknot. But then when they write an album that is distinctly Slipknot, you're met with fan base reactions like, this just sounds the same as the rest of the albums. For me personally, I'm in the latter group. I just think this, we've done this before. I'm bored of this sound. My opinions on this discography led to me respecting a certain album a lot more than I think a lot of people do. And let's talk about that album now. I respect the Grey Chapter a lot more than I think I actually like it. I like the evolution on this record. I like that it still retains the edgy, angsty Slipknot vibe we all know and love, but still introduces like a more heartfelt and accessible element to it. Like, I don't think this album resembles anything from Stone Sour like the ones we've just covered do. But the Grey Chapter is also kind of like their first steps into experimentation. So it does kind of still sound like Slipknot kind of getting their groove with a new sound. The training wheels are still on. And I would have liked to seen this kind of sound expanded on a bit more in the future, because I think overall this was kind of like the right steps to take the music. Yeah, the previous two records I just covered are probably a lot heavier than this one, but they didn't speak to me in the way that this one speaks to me. I will make an exception for Custer, however. I'm very burnt out by that song. I'm very sick of it. Guys, before we move on, I know that Slipknot is a very popular band. I know that people have got a lot of very strong opinions about a lot of the albums in the discography. Please just remember that this is just my opinion. Be kind about it in the comments. Let's generate an actual discussion about this music. This record and the one above it are very, very nostalgic for me. I don't think All Hope Is Gone is quite as good as a full package as any of the albums above it. But Jesus Christ, man, some of the hits on this record hit like a fucking truck. And this record does contain some of the most memorable songs in, like, the whole discography. Like Psychosocial, Snuff, Vehenna, fucking Till We Die, the title track. There's so many good songs on this record. But there's also just as many, like, forgettable tracks, and that means it just lands beneath the other albums on this list. I'm very nostalgic for Volume 3, particularly Vermilion Part 2. That's a song that I listened to a lot when I was going through a bit of a depresso espresso phase of my life. Same with The Blister Exists and, like, The Nameless. So when I listen to this record, I'm very much reminded of, like, my school life and just how I felt and whatnot. So I'm very biased for this record. I fucking love it from top to bottom. I do think it kind of suffers from similar problems to All Hope Is Gone. Like, objectively, there's a lot of filler tracks on this record, and as a whole package, it's just way too long. But also it lands here just because the records above are just so fucking good. So as much as I love it, I can't really, like, objectively put it higher than, the debut or Iowa. Speaking of the debut, it lands here. This, just like the record above it, is just like a magic in a bottle album. Like, this album blew people's minds when it came out back in the day. I was a bit of a baby at the time, so I couldn't experience that, but I've seen the opinions, I've spoken to the people. Like, the masks, the anger, the sheer aggression this album offers was just so, like, undeniable for the time. Even in a world that already had plenty of things like death metal and stuff, people listened to this and it was just so refreshing for the time. Corey's vocal delivery is fantastic, lovely balance between like the more cleaner melodies and the fucking, obviously he's very iconic harsh vocals. The whole DJing influence really set this album apart and gave it such a unique sound. So many memorable bangers on this record, too many to name. And I'm sure for a lot of people this could be swapped with my number one pick. But before we get to my number one pick, this is one of the few discographies that gets an honorable mention. Mate, Feed, Kill, Repeat is a fucking wild album, and if you've not listened to this because it doesn't have Corey Taylor, you need to fucking do yourself a favour and go and listen to it. Because this album is just a fucking roller coaster of a record. The debut's aggression is there, but there's much more of like, especially with the previous vocalist, there's much more of like a death metal influence to his vocals. I didn't feel right putting this in the full discography ranking as part of the list because it sounds so different to the other albums. The aggression from the debut is there, but there's also like a freeform jazz influence to this record. It's kind of hard to accurately describe what it's like to listen to this, you know, without just going and listening to it. I do highly recommend listening to this album, but I don't feel comfortable ranking it within the list, so it gets an honourable mention. Iowa is a very special album. This is one of those records that I know a lot of people who are into death metal and brutal death and say they don't really listen to nu metal anymore, but Iowa, that shit can go up their arseholes anytime it likes. This album has unmatched levels of anger, hatred, even when compared to genres much heavier than nu metal. The band members recording this were so pissed off, and it is like crystal clear on display when you listen to it. The deliveries on the vocals, the attacks on the instrumentation, it is just so angry, it's so heavy, it's just, like I said before, it's magic in a bottle, this record. If I ever find myself coming back to Slipknot for any reasons other than just nostalgia, it's normally to come back to Iowa. I will say my one criticism with this record is that some of the lyricism can be a little bit cringy, a little bit cheesy. If you're 555, then I'm 666. But it's otherwise like just a small blemish on an absolutely fantastic, powerful, hateful album. Easily my number one.